She answered the phone, and spoke 10 languages without hesitation. The millionaire in the room stopped everything and was shocked by the scene. "Who is this woman?" he whispered, completely intrigued. That night, he made a decision that would change his life. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We continue. The city was bustling with its usual hustle and bustle. From the 20th floor of a building in the heart of Main Street, Fiona Grimaldi watched the action through her office window while speaking fluently in Mandarin on the phone. At 35, Fiona was one of the most sought-after translators and interpreters in the country, with an almost supernatural ability to understand and reproduce the most diverse languages and accents. With wavy black hair and piercing brown eyes, her appearance conveyed the same intensity as her words. As a young girl growing up in the countryside, Fiona demonstrated an astonishing ability to learn languages. Her grandmother used to say that she had a musical ear for words. What began as a childhood pastime, listening to foreign radio stations in secret at night, turned into a brilliant career that has seen her work at international conferences, business negotiations, and cultural events around the world. "Xie, see you tomorrow at the conference," she concluded the call and consulted her digital calendar. That week promised to be especially busy, with the arrival of delegations from Mercosur for a cultural integration meeting in São Paulo. Fiona would be responsible for facilitating communication between representatives of different nationalities. And as always, she felt that familiar mix of anxiety and excitement. "Mrs. Fiona, there's a call online too. She said it's important, but she didn't want to identify herself," said Marcia, her assistant, over the internal line. Intrigued, Fiona answered. On the other end, a deep, confident male voice greeted her. "Good morning, Mrs. Grimaldi. My name is Rafael Muller. I believe you have heard of me." Fiona's heart raced. Who didn't know Rafael Muller, one of Brazil's most successful businessmen, famous for his technological innovations and social projects? The son of immigrants, he built an empire from nothing and in recent years had stood out for his investments in education and culture. His companies were among the most valuable in Latin America, and his fortune was estimated in the billions. "Certainly. Mr. Muller, it is an honor to receive your call. How may I help you?" "I have been following your work for some time, Mrs. Grimaldi. Your linguistic skills are extraordinary. I have a proposal that I believe may interest you. I would prefer to discuss it in person. Would you be available for dinner this evening?" The sudden proposal took her by surprise. Despite her busy schedule, Fiona felt she couldn't refuse the invitation. There was something in Raphael's voice, a mixture of determination and sincerity that piqued her curiosity. "It would be a pleasure, Mr. Muller." "Excellent. I'll send a car at 8 p.m. to pick you up. We already have your home address." Before she could ask how he knew where she lived, Raphael hung up, leaving her with a strange feeling. On the one hand, she felt flattered by the interest of someone so influential. On the other, she was intrigued by the mystery surrounding that invitation. The rest of the day passed in a blur. As she worked on translating documents for the conference, her mind wandered, imagining what Rafael Muller might want with her. At 7 p.m., already in her apartment in the Pinheiros neighborhood, Fiona chose an elegant but understated navy blue dress and finished her makeup with a subtle red lipstick. At 8 p.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. A uniformed chauffeur was waiting to take her to a black limousine parked in front of the building. During the ride, Fiona watched the city lights through the dark window of the vehicle, reflecting on how her life could change after this encounter. The car stopped in front of one of the most exclusive restaurants in São Paulo, on top of a skyscraper, with panoramic views of the city. Upon entering, she was immediately led to a reserved area, where Rafael Muller was waiting for her. Tall, with grey hair at his temples that contrasted with his youthful and vigorous appearance, Rafael stood up when he saw her. His green eyes conveyed a sharp intelligence, while his smile revealed a natural charm that the tabloids often mentioned. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, without appearing ostentatious. "Mrs. Grimaldi, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," he said, extending his hand in a firm greeting. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Muller," Fiona replied, impressed by the aura of charisma he exuded. something that the photos in the magazines could not fully capture. After the initial formalities and the first sips of an award-winning red wine, Raphael got straight to the point. "I've been following your career for longer than you know, Fiona. Can I call you that? Your ability to understand not just the words, but the cultural context behind them, is a rare gift." "Thank you," she replied, intrigued by the specific interest in her abilities. "And yes, you can call me Fiona. My business is expanding into increasingly diverse markets," he continued. "China, India, the Middle East, African countries. I don't just want conventional translators or interpreters. I need someone who understands the cultural nuances, who can guide me through the unsaid, the fine print of negotiations." Fiona nodded, understanding perfectly what he meant. Words are only the surface of communication. The true meaning, often, lies in the silence between them. Raphael's eyes shone with approval. "Exactly. That's why I want to invite you to become my personal cultural and linguistic consultant. Not just to translate documents or meetings, but to advise me strategically on my international projects." The proposal was tempting, but Fiona hesitated. "I have several clients and commitments." "I'm willing to pay you 3 times what you currently earn," Raphael interrupted, "and still ensure that you have the freedom to keep some of your current clients if you so desire. Plus," he paused, leaning slightly across the table, "besides the financial aspect, I can offer you something that I know you value greatly: access to projects that can truly make a difference in the world." Those last words touched Fiona deeply. For years she had facilitated important communications, but always as a neutral bridge, never truly involved in the ultimate impact of those conversations. The idea of using her skills for something bigger, something transformative, was alluring. "What kind of projects?" he asked, unable to hide the interest in his voice. "I am developing educational initiatives that use technology to democratize access to language learning in underserved communities," Raphael explained. "I believe that the language barrier is one of the biggest obstacles to social and economic development in our country. With your experience and my resources, we could create something revolutionary." The dinner went on for hours, with Raphael sharing his vision of how technology and education could transform lives, especially when it came to intercultural communication. The more he talked, the more Fiona felt drawn not only to his professional proposal, but to the genuine passion he demonstrated for his ideas. At the end of the night, when the restaurant was almost empty, Raphael finally asked, "So, Fiona, can I count on you on this journey?" Looking out at the illuminated city beyond the restaurant windows, Fiona felt she was at a turning point in her life. For years, she had been nothing more than a translator of words. Now she had the chance to translate dreams into reality. "Yes," he finally replied, extending his hand to seal the deal. "When do we start?" Raphael's smile lit his face with an almost boyish intensity. "Tomorrow. I'll send a car to pick you up at 9 a.m. to meet our headquarters and the team. Welcome aboard, Fiona." As she rode home in the limousine, Fiona couldn't contain her excitement. Her mind was buzzing with possibilities and questions. Who was Raphael Müller, really? Beyond his public image, what awaited her in this new phase? And why, among so many qualified professionals, had he chosen her specifically? That night, Fiona slept little, lulled by dreams in different languages, and by the feeling that, from the next day on, her life would never be the same again. At Choi, 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, Fiona was already waiting on the sidewalk in front of her building, when the same limousine from the night before pulled up silently. During the drive to the Müller Company's headquarters, she watched the city through the window while trying to organize her thoughts. She had researched more about Raphael during the early hours of the morning, discovering that, despite his fortune and fame, the businessman kept his personal life extremely private. The limousine drove into the financial district and stopped in front of an imposing glass and steel tower. In the lobby, a receptionist was waiting for her with a personalized badge and led her directly to the executive elevator. "Mr. Müller is looking forward to seeing you," she said with a professional smile, before inserting a special card into the panel and pressing the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, Fiona was greeted by a surprisingly welcoming environment, unlike the corporate coldness she had expected. The entire floor was an open space with modern furniture, abundant plants, and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. In one corner, a diverse group of people worked, around a large circular table. In the center of the space, Raphael was engaged in animated conversation with a formally dressed, indigenous-looking woman. Noticing her, Raphael came towards her with long strides and a warm smile. "Fiona," punctual as expected, "come, let me introduce you to the team." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of faces, names, and information. Raphael's core team was made up of professionals from diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds, each expert in their own field. There was Gianna Sorel, an anthropologist with Tupinamba blood, responsible for educational projects in indigenous communities. Carlos Kim, an educational technology specialist with Korean roots. Danilo Novas, a young programming prodigy from a community in Recife, and several other equally impressive professionals. "Our philosophy is simple," Raphael explained as they walked through the office. "We believe that diversity is not only a social issue, but also a competitive advantage. Different perspectives generate innovative solutions." Fiona nodded, already feeling inspired by the surroundings. "And what exactly will my role be? Here?" Raphael led her to a private meeting room overlooking Ibirapuera Park. "Your role will be multifaceted," he began, gesturing for them to sit in comfortable armchairs. "First, I want you to accompany me in my international negotiations, not only as an interpreter but also as a cultural consultant. Second, we need your expertise to develop our main initiative at the moment, Project Babel." "Project Babel?" Fiona asked, intrigued by the name that referred to the ancient biblical tower. "Exactly," Raphael smiled, his eyes shining with genuine enthusiasm. "We are developing a revolutionary educational platform that combines artificial intelligence and innovative pedagogical methods for language teaching. We want to make it accessible to marginalized communities across Brazil, from urban favelas to remote indigenous villages in the Amazon." Raphael took out a tablet and showed Fiona prototypes of the system's interface. "Our technology adapts to the user's cultural and socio-economic context, creating personalized learning experiences. We don't want to just teach words, but build cultural bridges." As Raphael explained the technical details of the project, Fiona felt a growing admiration for his vision. He was not just a businessman seeking profit, but someone genuinely committed to social change. "The prototype is already in testing in 5 different communities," he continued. "The initial results are promising, but we still face significant challenges, especially in cultural adaptation of the content. That's where you come in." Fiona leaned forward, already mentally engaged in the challenge. "I believe we need to consider not only linguistic differences, but also the specific social contexts of each community, metaphors and examples that work in an urban setting may not make sense in rural or indigenous communities." Raphael nodded approvingly. "Exactly the kind of insight we need. This project is my personal passion, Fiona, more so than any other endeavor I've ever undertaken." There was something about the intensity of his gaze that piqued Fiona's curiosity. "Why such a personal interest in language education, if I may ask?" Raphael was silent for a moment, as if pondering how much to reveal. Finally, with a slight sigh, he replied, "It may be too early to share personal stories, but let's just say that I understand deeply what it means to be isolated by language barriers. One day, I will tell you more about it." Before Fiona could question further, the door to the room opened and Gina walked in with some documents. "Sorry to interrupt, but the representatives of the Guarani community have confirmed the visit for next week. We need to finalize the preparations." "Perfect," Raphael exclaimed, standing up. "Fiona, how about a baptism of fire? This will be an excellent opportunity for you to see the project in action. The Guarani are among the first to test our platform." Their conversation was interrupted by Raphael's phone ringing. When he answered, his expression changed subtly. I understand. Tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes. Hanging up, he turned to Fiona with a more serious expression. A small setback. I'll need to leave you with Jana to continue the tour. Urgent matters that require my personal attention. After Raphael left, Jana led Fiona through the rest of the facility, explaining more details about the various projects underway. Raphael is a visionary, the anthropologist commented as they walked, but he is also a man of many secrets. What do you mean? Fiona asked, reading between the lines. Jana shrugged. I've been working with him for 5 years, and there are still parts of his life that are complete mysteries. His projects are public, but the man behind them, few really know him. The afternoon progressed with Fiona meeting more team members and delving deeper into the details of Project Babel. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but electrified by the possibilities that lay ahead. As the sun began to set, tinting the São Paulo sky with orange hues, Raphael finally returned to the office. I apologize for my absence, he said, meeting her in the conference room where he had left his notes. I hope Gianna was a good host. Excellent, Fiona replied. I'm impressed with the scope of the projects. Raphael smiled, but Fiona noticed that something in his expression had changed since this morning. There was a subtle tension in his shoulders, a veiled concern in his eyes. Did something happen? He ventured to ask. Nothing to worry about, he replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. Just the usual challenges of managing multiple interests. He glanced at his watch. It's late. How about dinner? There's an excellent restaurant. Downstairs. We can discuss your impressions of the first day and finalize the details of your contract. During dinner, served in a private area of the restaurant, Raphael gradually regained his initial enthusiasm, detailing the next steps for the implementation of Project Babel and the international commitments they would have in the coming weeks. Our first trip will be to Manaus next Friday, he explained. We have a meeting with indigenous leaders from different ethnic groups to discuss adapting the platform to their native languages. Many of them are endangered, with only a few elderly speakers remaining. Fiona felt a thrill of excitement. I've always dreamed of working on the preservation of indigenous languages. Brazil's linguistic diversity is an undervalued treasure. Exactly, Raphael agreed, his green eyes lighting up again with that passion that had impressed her from the beginning. Every language that is lost is an entire universe of knowledge and perspectives that disappears forever. As they enjoyed dessert, Raphael hesitated briefly before asking, Fiona, have you heard of Paolo Moretti? The seemingly casual question contained an underlying tension that was not lost on Fiona. The name sounds familiar. You're that tech guy, right? The owner of Moretti Tech. Raphael nodded slowly. Exactly. We were partners early in our careers. We founded our first company together almost 20 years ago. I didn't know that, Fiona commented, realizing she had touched on a sensitive subject. Few people know, Raphael replied, his gaze distant as if revisiting old memories. We had fundamental disagreements about the ethical direction of the business. We parted ways 15 years ago, not on good terms. He paused, taking a sip of wine. I mention this because you'll probably run into him at some point. Paolo has been keeping a close eye on my current projects. There was something about the way Raphael phrased that last sentence that triggered Fiona's intuition. Does he represent some kind of problem? Let's just say our worldviews remain incompatible, Raphael replied enigmatically. Paul believes in profit above all else. I believe that business can and should serve a greater purpose. He smiled, trying to diffuse the tension. But enough of unpleasant topics. Shall we finalize your contract? Fiona nodded, but the mention of Paolo Moretti kept echoing in her mind. There was something more to the story, something Raphael wasn't fully revealing. As they parted at the entrance to the restaurant, Raphael held her hands in his for a moment longer than necessary. I'm genuinely happy that you've agreed to join us, Fiona. I have a feeling this partnership will be transformative for all of us. In the limo that took her home, Fiona reflected on the whirlwind of a day. Project Babel, the diverse team, Raphael's inspiring vision, It all seemed almost too good to be true, and maybe that was the point that bothered her. In her experience, when something seemed too perfect, there were usually hidden complications. Upon arriving at her apartment, Fiona could not resist the temptation and did some more research on Paolo Moretti. The results showed a successful businessman, although with a considerably less philanthropic reputation than Raphael. But what really caught her attention was an old photo from almost 20 years ago. Raphael and Paolo, young and smiling in front of a small office with a sign that said, Mont Mendes Tecnologia. There was nothing in their youthful faces to indicate the breakup that would come later. Fiona fell asleep with that image in her mind, and an indefinable feeling that there was much more to discover about Raphael Müller and the true reasons behind his sudden interest in her abilities. The next 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity for Fiona. Her life had completely transformed since she had accepted Raphael's proposal. She traveled constantly to Manaus, Cuiabá, Salvador, Fortaleza, as well as to remote communities in the interior of the country, places where Portuguese mixed with indigenous languages and regional dialects, creating a fascinating linguistic mosaic. With each visit, Fiona felt more involved with Project Babel. She saw firsthand the impact the educational platform was having in communities where access to formal education was limited. Children who would never have had the opportunity to learn a second language were now absorbing vocabulary in English, Spanish, and even Mandarin with surprising ease. On a sunny Wednesday morning, Fiona was in one of the meeting rooms at the headquarters, finalizing the adjustments to adapt the platform to the Tucano language, spoken in the Upper Rio Negro. Raphael entered the room with his usual dynamism, but there was something different in his expression. "I have a surprise for you," he announced, holding out an envelope. "We've got reservations at the most exclusive restaurant in São Paulo tonight to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Fiona asked, surprised by the unexpected gesture. "The success of Project Babel, of course," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "And also, well, let's just say I have some news to share. Can I pick you up at 8? There was something in Raphael's gaze that made her blush slightly. Over the past few weeks, their relationship had grown increasingly close. What had begun as a strictly professional partnership had evolved into a friendship marked by long conversations about literature, philosophy, and shared dreams for a more connected world. Fiona found herself, with increasing frequency, thinking about him at inappropriate times. 8 o'clock is perfect, he replied, trying to maintain his professional composure. That night, as Fiona was preparing for dinner, she received an unexpected call. It was her Aunt Clara, her mother's only surviving sibling who lived in a small town in the countryside. "Fiona, you need to come home," her aunt said urgently. "I found some things in your grandmother Teresa's belongings that you need to see. They are documents, old letters, things about our family that we never knew." "Auntie, I have an important appointment tonight," Fiona replied, puzzled. "What exactly is it about?" "It's not a telephone issue," Clara insisted, "but it has to do with your gift for languages. It's no coincidence, my daughter. It's in our blood more than we imagined." Fiona's curiosity was immediately piqued. Her grandmother Teresa had been a mysterious woman who spoke several languages, despite having little formal education, and always told fascinating stories about her traveling ancestors. When she died 2 years ago, she left behind a trunk of belongings that the family had yet to finish sorting through. "I'll come this weekend, Aunt, I promise." When she hung up, Fiona was left thoughtful. The timing of the call seemed almost providential, as if the universe were conspiring to reveal secrets in her professional and personal life simultaneously. At 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Raphael was impeccably dressed in a dark suit that highlighted his green eyes and the quiet charm he always exuded. On the way to the restaurant, they talked about the recent progress of the project, but Fiona noticed that Raphael seemed slightly nervous, something unusual for someone usually so sure of himself. The restaurant was stunning, located at the top of one of the tallest buildings in the city, with panoramic views of the illuminated São Paulo. They were shown to a private table, separated from the others by elegant bamboo screens, creating an intimate and exclusive atmosphere. After the sommelier poured the wine, Raphael raised his glass in a toast. "To the future," he said, with a look that seemed to contain hidden meanings. "To the future," Fiona replied, feeling butterflies in her stomach that had nothing to do with the wine. During dinner, they talked about light topics, avoiding work-related topics. Raphael told stories about his youth, about how he started in business selling software that he himself programmed for small local companies. Fiona talked about her childhood in the countryside, about the nights she spent listening to foreign radio stations in secret, and about her grandmother Teresa's unconditional support when she decided to study languages. It was only after dessert that Raphael finally addressed the real reason for the celebration. "Fiona, in the months we've been working together, I've come to realize that our partnership goes far beyond the professional," he began, his voice taking on a deeper tone. "Your work on Project Babel has exceeded all my expectations. Your cultural sensitivity, your intelligence, you have completely transformed the initiative." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "That's why I want to officially invite you to become the CEO of Project Babel, no longer just a consultant, but a full partner in the development and expansion of the platform." Fiona felt her heart race. This was an extraordinary opportunity, one that would put her in a position to make strategic decisions and truly shape the future of the project that had become so important to her. "I don't know what to say," she stammered, genuinely surprised. "Say yes," Raphael smiled, reaching across the table to lightly touch her hand. "You deserve this recognition. And to be completely honest, I need you. In this position, we have great challenges ahead of us." "What kind of challenges?" Fiona asked, noticing a shadow pass quickly across his eyes. Raphael hesitated briefly. "Paolo Moretti is trying to launch a similar project, not out of idealism, but out of pure competition. He can't stand to see me succeed in something he doesn't master." It was the first time since that initial conversation that Raphael had mentioned his former partner. Fiona had researched Paolo Moretti more in the past few weeks and discovered that, in fact, Moretti Tech had been investing heavily in educational technology recently. "Is he trying to copy our platform?" he asked. "Not exactly copying, but creating something similar with a completely different approach. While we focus on cultural preservation and democratic access, Paolo only sees an opportunity for profit, selling to elite schools and completely ignoring the communities that need it most." There was a bitterness in Raphael's words that revealed how much that rivalry still affected him. Fiona felt it was time to ask something that had been puzzling her from the beginning. "Raphael, what really happened between you two? What was the disagreement that separated such promising partners?" The silence that followed was long enough for Fiona to fear she had crossed some invisible line. Finally, Raphael took a deep breath and replied, "Core values, Fiona. Paul and I started out with the same vision, but our paths diverged when the money started rolling in. He wanted to expand at any cost, even if it meant compromising ethical principles. I refused to participate in certain agreements." Fiona realized that there was more to the story, but also that Raphael was not ready to reveal all the details. Respecting his space, she decided to return to the main topic. "I accept the position," he said finally. "I believe in Project Babel and want to see it reach its full potential." Raphael's face lit up with a genuine smile. "You won't regret. Toyson, together we will transform language education in Brazil." At the end of the night, when Raphael dropped her off at her apartment, there was a moment of palpable tension between them. Standing in front of the door, their eyes met with an intensity that went beyond their professional relationship. For a moment, Fiona thought he was going to kiss her, and she was surprised to realize how much she wanted that to happen. However, Raphael just held her hands in his, as he had done on the first day, and said softly, "Thank you for trusting me." "Fiona, good night." When she entered her apartment, Fiona felt simultaneously euphoric and confused. The professional offer was a dream come true, but the feelings she was beginning to have for Raphael worried her. Mixing work and emotions rarely ended well. Over the weekend, Fiona visited her Aunt Clara in the countryside. Between conversations and childhood memories, her aunt gave her an old diary of her grandmother Teresa. In it, Fiona discovered exciting records of a lineage of linguistically gifted women acting as interpreters and cultural mediators across generations. When he returned to São Paulo, he felt part of something bigger. In his apartment, he opened his laptop and wrote to Rafael, "I'm ready to take Project Babel to the next level. We have a legacy to build." After sending the email, Fiona returned to the family journal, determined to absorb every detail of this newfound story. In one of her grandmother Teresa's last entries, she found a sentence that made her smile with emotion. "The true gift is not in speaking many languages, but in using words to build bridges where before there were only chasms." That was exactly what he had intended to do with Project Babel, and at that moment, he felt that all the pieces of his life were finally fitting together into a meaningful mosaic. Fiona's promotion to CEO of Project Babel was met with enthusiasm by the entire team. Her dedication and vision had earned everyone's respect over the past few months. The office she now occupied, with panoramic views of São Paulo, reflected her new position, elegant, functional, and strategically positioned next to Rafael's office. In her first week as director, Fiona dove headfirst into expanding the project to the Brazilian Northeast. Meetings followed at a frantic pace, with linguistic researchers, programmers, and education specialists working together to adapt the platform to the particularities of Northeastern Portuguese and its rich regionalisms. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, as she was finishing up a video conference with teachers from Recife, Fiona received a message from Rafael asking them to meet on the rooftop of the building as soon as possible. Intrigued by the unusual location for a meeting, especially in the overcast weather, she went upstairs immediately after ending the call. The terrace was surprisingly protected from the rain by a retractable roof. Rafael stood near the edge, looking out over the grey city beneath the overcast sky. Something in his slightly tense posture warned Fiona that this would be no ordinary conversation. "Did you want to see me?" she asked, coming closer. Rafael turned, his face showing a vulnerable expression she rarely saw. "I need to share something with you, Fiona, something very few people know about me." He pointed to a covered bench near a small conservatory. When they sat down, Rafael remained silent for a few moments as if organizing his thoughts. Finally, with a deep sigh, he began. "My real name is not Rafael Müller, at least not originally." Fiona felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold wind blowing. "What do you mean?" "I was born Rashid Murad in Aleppo, Syria," he revealed, his voice taking on a slight accent that Fiona had never noticed before. "I came to Brazil when I was 12 as a refugee, fleeing the civil war that destroyed my family and my country." The revelation hit Fiona like a bolt of lightning. She could never have imagined that the powerful businessman, often cited as an example of a successful Brazilian entrepreneur, had such distant origins. "I arrived alone, welcomed by a refugee program," Rafael continued. His green eyes, which Fiona now realized were unusual for someone of Syrian origin, fixed on the heavy clouds. "My parents managed to put me on a plane to Brazil, but they themselves never made it out. My father was a university professor and my mother a translator. Both were victims of the bombings that destroyed our city." Fiona felt a lump in her throat. "I'm sorry, Rafael, I had no idea." "Few do," he smiled sadly. "When I arrived, I was adopted by a childless Brazilian couple, the Mullers, wonderful people who gave me a new home, a new chance. Over time, I adopted the name Rafael Müller completely, trying to leave the trauma and pain behind. I changed my appearance too. I dyed my hair, wore green contact lenses. I did everything I could to fit in, to be accepted." "Aren't your eyes naturally green?" Fiona asked, surprised. Rafael shook his head. "Laser surgery to permanently change my color. One of the first things I did when I made my first million. Pathetic, isn't it, wanting to completely erase my origins?" "It's not pathetic," Fiona disagreed softly. "It's human. You were young, traumatized, trying to survive in a new world." Rafael nodded, grateful for the understanding. The hardest part was the language barrier. When I arrived, I didn't speak a word of Portuguese. I remember the despair of not being able to communicate, of not understanding what was being said around me. It was like being trapped in an invisible bubble, seeing the world through a fogged-up window. Fiona was beginning to understand Raphael's passion for Project Babel. It wasn't just philanthropy or business acumen, it was something deeply personal. That's why you created Project Babel, she concluded. Because you know exactly what it's like to be isolated, because you don't understand the local language. Exactly, Raphael confirmed. It took me almost 2 years to feel comfortable with Portuguese, 2 years of solitude, of being the foreigner, the different one. I promised myself that if I ever had the resources, I would create tools so that no one would have to go through what I went through. Thunder rumbled in the distance, announcing the intensification of the storm. Raphael continued, now with a firmer voice. When I met Paolo Moretti in engineering school, he was one of the first people to truly believe in me, in my potential. Not as the adopted refugee, but as an equal. Our partnership began with a genuine friendship and a shared vision of using technology to solve real problems. What changed? Fiona asked, sensing they were getting to the heart of the matter. Success. Money, power. Raphael listed them bitterly. Our first company grew quickly, attracting important investors. Paolo began to change, to see only the numbers, the profits. When I proposed developing affordable educational technologies for underprivileged communities, he laughed. He said there was no financial return in charity. Raphael stood up, walking a few steps under the cover as the rain fell heavily around the sheltered terrace. The final straw was when I discovered he was dealing with companies in digital surveillance, technologies that could be used to monitor and control people, the kind of thing that contributed to the destruction of my home country. I confronted him. We had a terrible fight and I walked away, selling my share of the company for a fraction of what it was worth. And he started from scratch, Fiona added, amazed at the man's willpower. From scratch, but with a clear vision, Raphael confirmed. I built Muller Technologia with different principles, innovation with social purpose, profit with responsibility, and each success I achieved seemed to infuriate Paolo even more. Raphael sat back down next to Fiona, now looking her straight in the eye. I'm telling you all this because I need you to understand who we're dealing with. Paolo isn't just competing with me in the marketplace, he wants to destroy me, to prove that his vision is the right one. And now, with Project Babel gaining international recognition, he's more determined than ever. Does he pose a real threat? Fiona asked, worried. Yes, Raphael replied without hesitation. In the last few weeks, we've received reports that representatives from Moretti Tech are visiting the same communities where we've implemented Babel, offering financial incentives to abandon our platform and adopt theirs. That's unethical, Fiona exclaimed indignantly. That's his modus operandi, Raphael sighed. But there's more. I've received information that Paolo is planning something big to sabotage the official launch of the Babel platform next month during the International Education Forum in Salvador. Fiona felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. The forum would be a crucial moment to introduce Project Babel to investors, educators, and government officials from around the world. Any scandal or problem could jeopardize years of work. What could he do? He asked, trying to assess the threat. I'm not exactly sure, Raphael admitted, but I know Paolo. He will probably try to discredit the project, question its effectiveness or ethics, maybe claim that we are exploiting vulnerable communities or that the technology has critical flaws. But none of that is true, Fiona protested. Truth matters little when you have enough influence and money to shape the narrative, Raphael replied sadly, and Paolo has both. At that moment, a flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. The rain intensified, creating a curtain of water around the covered terrace, further isolating them from the outside world. Why are you telling me all this now? Fiona asked softly. Raphael hesitated, his gaze revealing a vulnerability rarely seen. Because I trust you, Fiona. More than that. He paused, as if debating whether to continue. Because in you I've found someone who truly understands what it means to build bridges between different worlds." There was something about the way he said those words that made Fiona's heart race. It wasn't just a professional statement. There was an undeniable personal subtext. "I also found something unexpected in you, Raphael," she admitted, feeling it was time for mutual honesty. "Something that goes beyond professional admiration." The space between them felt charged with electricity, like the air before a thunderstorm. For a moment, Fiona thought that what she had been imagining for the past few weeks was finally happening, but the shrill ringing of Raphael's phone broke the spell of the moment. He stared at the screen with obvious frustration. "It's the legal department. I need to take this." The call was brief but enough to completely change the mood. When he hung up, Raphael looked worried. "We have just received a legal notice. Moretti Tech is alleging intellectual property infringement, stating that some of the technology in Project Babel was developed when we were still partners." "Is that possible?" Fiona asked, alarmed. "Absolutely not," Raphael replied firmly. "Babel was conceived years after our separation, with completely different technology. This is just Paolo's first move to try to destabilize us before the forum." He pocketed the phone, his expression determined. "We need to prepare ourselves, Fiona. The next few weeks will be decisive. Paolo will use every means possible to attack us, judicial, media, perhaps even trying to sow discord internally." "We are ready," Fiona said with conviction, surprising herself with her own strength. "I believe in Project Babel and the difference it is making. We will not let corporate games destroy something so important." Raphael watched her with a mixture of admiration and something else, something that made Fiona blush slightly. "I knew I chose the right person," he said finally. "We'll get through this together." By the time they left the terrace, the storm was beginning to die down, but Fiona knew that a much bigger storm was brewing in their professional lives. As they walked side by side back to their offices, their fingers brushed briefly. A fleeting, almost accidental contact, but one that was loaded with meaning. That night, in her apartment, Fiona revisited her family journal, seeking inspiration from the strong women who had come before her. In one of her great-grandmother Clara's entries, she found words that seemed written for that specific moment. "When words become weapons, it is up to us, the guardians of languages, to transform them back into bridges. There is power in naming things correctly, in translating not just languages, but intentions and truths." With her journal open on the table, Fiona began to outline strategies for the International Forum. If Paolo Moretti planned to use words and accusations to attack them, she would use her most precious gift, communication, to defend the project that was now an integral part of her life and purpose. As she worked, she thought about Raphael and the revelation of his past as a refugee. That shared vulnerability had changed something between them, creating a connection that went deeper than mere attraction or professional admiration. There was a mutual understanding, a recognition of souls who, each in their own way, knew what it meant to build new identities and break down barriers. Her phone vibrated with a message. It was from Raphael. "Thank you for today, for listening, for understanding. There is so much more I want to share with you, Fiona, when this is all over." She smiled at the screen, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The message didn't end, as if he didn't quite know how to conclude the thought, or maybe because some things just couldn't be put into words yet. "We'll get through this together," he replied simply. "One day at a time." Putting her phone away, Fiona returned to work with renewed determination. The next few weeks would require all her skill, intelligence, and courage. Paolo Moretti might have money and influence, but she had something equally powerful: the legacy of generations of women who had used words to change the world. And now, it was her turn to honor that legacy. The weeks leading up to the International Education Forum in Salvador were marked by an escalation of tension. As Raphael had predicted, Paolo Moretti began a systematic offensive against Project Babel, using multiple fronts of attack. First came articles in the trade press, subtly questioning the platform's effectiveness and hinting at possible negative impacts on local cultures. Then came spontaneous testimonies from supposedly dissatisfied users reporting technical problems that Fiona's team knew were fabricated. Every day, a new battlefront opened up. One particularly hectic morning, Jana burst into Fiona's office without warning, her normally serene face contorted with concern. "We need to talk urgently," the anthropologist said, closing the door behind her. "I just got a call from the Patakso village in Bahia. Representatives from Moretti Tech were there yesterday, offering free equipment and money to get them to abandon our platform." Fiona felt her stomach sink. The Patakso had been one of the first indigenous communities to embrace Project Babel, using it not only to learn formal Portuguese and English, but also to document and preserve their own ancestral language. "What did they say?" he asked, dreading the answer. To her surprise, Jana smiled for the first time since she had walked in. The chief sent the representatives away. He said that Project Babel is not just technology for them, but a way to preserve their cultural identity, but he warned that other smaller villages, with fewer resources, might not be able to resist the offers. "We need to act quickly," Fiona concluded, picking up the phone. "I'll talk to Raphael about arranging personal visits to all the partner communities before the forum." "There's one more thing," Gianna said hesitantly. One of the Moretti Tech representatives mentioned that Paolo Moretti has compromising information about Raphael, which would be revealed during the forum if they didn't get the endorsements they wanted. Fiona froze, phone in hand. Blackmail. Could it be that Paolo knew about Raphael's past as a Syrian refugee and planned to use that information to publicly harm him? "Thank you, Jana. Please keep in constant contact with the communities. If you have any news, please let me know immediately." After the anthropologist left, Fiona tried to call Raphael, but discovered that he was in an emergency meeting with the company's lawyers. The lawsuit filed by Moretti Tech, although clearly baseless, was consuming precious time and resources. Feeling too restless to stay in the office, Fiona decided to take a walk to gather her thoughts. In the elevator, she checked her phone and saw a notification from a business newspaper. Muller Technology shares fall 5% after rumors of problems at Project Babel. Downstairs, as she was going out to clear her head, Fiona received a newspaper notification. Rumors of problems with Project Babel cause Muller Technologia shares to decline. When he returned to the building, he learned that Paolo Moretti had been there. He had spoken to 3 programmers on the team, offering aggressive hiring proposals. The message was clear. He would not retreat, and he was now prepared to attack from all flanks. Back in her office, she found Raphael waiting. For her, visibly worried. "Fiona, where have you been? I've tried calling you several times." "I had an unexpected encounter in the lobby," she replied, closing the door. "Paolo Moretti was here." Raphael's face paled. "What did he want? What did he say?" Fiona recounted the conversation, noting the tension growing in Raphael's shoulders as she went on. When she mentioned the insinuation about who he really was, she saw the exact moment Raphael realized the implications. "He knows," Raphael muttered, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "Of course he knows. Paolo has always had the resources to investigate anyone he's interested in." "How much harm can this do to us?" Fiona asked directly. Raphael walked to the window, surveying the city for a few moments before answering. "It's not that I'm ashamed of my origins, Fiona. I got over that a long time ago. But I've built my public identity as Raphael Muller, the Brazilian businessman. If Paolo reveals my past in the right way, or rather in the wrong way, it could cast doubt on my credibility. Like this? He might claim I built my career on a false identity, question the legitimacy of my immigration documents, insinuate that I have divided loyalties or hidden agendas. In times of rising xenophobia, this could alienate more conservative investors and partners." Fiona felt a wave of indignation. "This is absurd. Your refugee background should be a cause for admiration, not suspicion." "In an ideal world..." "Yes," Raphael agreed with a sad smile, "but we don't live in an ideal world." At that moment, Fiona's phone rang. It was Danilo, the young programmer on the core team. "Fiona, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know right away, he said, his voice conveying urgency. We've just detected an attempted intrusion into our servers. Someone is trying to access the source code for the Babel platform. Did you get in? She asked, alarmed. No, our security protocols worked, but it was a sophisticated attempt, and... Danilo hesitated. We were able to trace the source. It came from an IP address registered to Moretti Tech. When she hung up, Fiona found Raphael watching her with a grave expression. Server hack? He asked, having only heard her side of the conversation. Yes, apparently Paul is not limiting his attacks to the legal and PR realm, Fiona replied. He is trying to steal our technology directly. Raphael shook his head, not looking surprised. It's always been that way with him. If he can't win playing fair, he changes the rules of the game. He stepped closer, placing his hands on Fiona's shoulders in a gesture that was both comforting and electrifying. We're facing an unscrupulous adversary, Fiona. The next few weeks will be crucial. We must remain united and vigilant. The touch of his hands sent a rush of heat through Fiona's body, momentarily distracting her from the gravity of the situation. There was something about Raphael's closeness, the vulnerability behind his strength that drew her almost magnetically. We're in this together, she said, meeting his gaze. Paolo doesn't know who he's dealing with. The following days were spent preparing intensively for the forum. Fiona coordinated visits to all partner communities, strengthening ties and explaining the situation. Raphael focused on neutralizing legal and media attacks, giving strategic interviews to clarify misunderstandings about the project. The technical team, led by Danilo, worked day and night to strengthen the security of the systems and finalize impressive new features to be demonstrated at the forum. Gianna organized a group of community leaders who would give personal testimonials about the positive impact of Babel on their lives. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Fiona and Raphael rarely had time alone, but when they did, the tension between them was almost palpable. Lingering glances, accidental hand-touching during meetings, late-night text messages, discussing work that inevitably drifted into more personal conversations, it all contributed to an atmosphere fraught with unrealized possibilities. The eve of the trip to Salvador, the core team gathered for a final briefing. The mood was one of cautious determination, everyone aware of the challenges, but confident in their preparation. Tomorrow we will be in the eye of the storm, Raphael said, concluding the meeting. Paolo will certainly try to destabilize us in every way possible. Stay strong and remember what really matters, the impact we are having on the real lives of real people. When everyone had left, Raphael asked Fiona to stay. Alone in the meeting room, he seemed to want to say something important, but he hesitated. What is it? She asked gently. I have a bad feeling about tomorrow, he finally admitted. Paul is unpredictable when he feels cornered, and I'm mostly worried about you. With me? Why? Because he realized how important you are to the project. And to me, Raphael replied, his voice dropping an octave. Paolo has always attacked what I value most. Fiona's heart raced at the implication of those words. I can take care of myself, she assured him, trying to keep the conversation professional, despite the heat in her face. I don't doubt it, Raphael smiled. It's just... He stepped closer, closing the space between them. There's so much I want to say, Fiona. So many things that need to be expressed. But with everything that's going on, after the forum, she added, understanding. We'll have time after the forum. Raphael nodded, looking both relieved and frustrated. After the forum, he agreed. Then, in a gesture that took her by surprise, he leaned forward and kissed her cheek softly, his lips lingering a second longer than social protocol would allow. Good night, Fiona. Rest well. That night in her apartment, Fiona packed her suitcase for the trip while her mind raced with thoughts of Raphael, Project Babel, and Paolo Moretti's threats. As she carefully folded the dress she would wear to the main presentation, her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? She answered cautiously. Miss Grimaldi, Paolo Moretti's voice came from the other end, making her stiffen. I hope I'm not calling too late. How did you get my personal number? She asked coldly. Paolo laughed. Details. I'm calling to make one last offer before the forum. 3 times your current salary plus bonus to join Moretti Tech as director of our education program. I'm not interested, Fiona replied immediately. Not even to save your dear Raphael's reputation, Paolo asked, his tone hardening. I have proof, Miss Grimaldi. Documents, records that show your boss is not who he says he is. I am prepared to make them public tomorrow unless you reconsider my offer. Fiona felt a surge of fury. This is blackmail, Mr. Moretti. This is business, he replied calmly. Raphael understands how the game works. He's just forgotten the rules. Raphael has told me everything about his past, Fiona countered, deciding to play her cards right. There is nothing you can reveal that will surprise me or change my opinion of him. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Interesting, Paolo said finally. So he trusts you. That makes things even more intriguing. His voice took on an almost amused tone. See you tomorrow in Salvador, Miss Grimaldi. I can't wait for our joint performance. The call ended, leaving Fiona with a sense of apprehension. What did Paul mean by joint presentation? How far was he willing to go to harm Raphael? Feeling that sleep would be impossible, Fiona opened her family journal again, seeking wisdom. In the words of her ancestors, an entry by her great-grandmother Clara, written during a politically turbulent time in Brazil, caught her eye. When words become weapons in the hands of the powerful, we must transform them into shields for the vulnerable. The truth, when well articulated, can overturn even the most elaborate lies. Closing her diary, Fiona made a decision. If Paolo Moretti planned to use Raphael's past against him, she would use her linguistic skills and professional credibility to turn that potential weakness into a strength. She began to sketch out a plan for the next day, working through the night. When she finally fell asleep in the early hours of the morning, her dreams were filled with words in multiple languages, intertwining and forming bridges over seemingly insurmountable chasms. Somewhere in the middle of this linguistic tapestry, Raphael and she walked hand in hand, moving forward together toward an uncertain but promising future. The Salvador Convention Center was ablaze under the tropical sun. On that Thursday morning, delegations of educators, technologists, and government representatives from around the world converged on Latin America's largest educational innovation event, the International Education Forum. At the luxurious beachfront hotel where the Babel project team was staying, Fiona was putting the finishing touches on her presentation. She had slept little the night before, anxious about what was to come. She knew that this day would be decisive not only for the future of the project, but also for her relationship with Raphael. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Gina, already dressed formally for the event, her face expressing concern. "We have a problem," the anthropologist said without preamble. Paolo Moretti managed to change the forum's schedule. Instead of separate presentations, we will now have a panel discussion on educational technologies, competing approaches, with Raphael and Paolo side by side. The moderator will be Gregor Andreasen. Fiona felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. Gregor Andreasen was a renowned journalist, known for his incisive and provocative interviews, and more importantly, he was notoriously close to the business circles that Paolo moved. "And when will Raphael find out about this?" he asked, trying to process the implications. "He already knows. He's meeting with the legal team right now," Jana replied. "The panel is scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main auditorium." "That gives us just—" Fiona checked her watch. 5 hours to prepare for a completely different format. Jana nodded grimly. "And there's more. Remember those 3 programmers Paolo tried to hire? One of them accepted the offer. Daniel Alaric resigned this morning and is now on staff at Moretti Tech. I'm afraid he took sensitive information with him." The news was like a punch in the gut. Daniel was one of the most talented programmers on the team, responsible for part of the platform's cultural adaptation algorithm. His departure, especially at this critical moment, was more than a technical loss. It was potentially a strategic vulnerability. "We need to speak to Danilo immediately," Fiona decided. He needs to check whether Daniel left any backdoors in the systems or transferred proprietary code. The next few hours were a whirlwind of emergency meetings, strategy adjustments, and attempts to mitigate damage. Raphael, when he finally reached Fiona around 11 a.m., looked simultaneously exhausted and energized by adrenaline. "Paolo is playing all his cards today," he said as they walked together down the hotel hallway toward the car that would take them to the convention center. "The debate format is clearly a trap, but we have no choice but to face it head-on." "I've been thinking about it all night," Fiona replied. "If he's planning to reveal his refugee past, we need to get ahead of it. Turn what would be a negative exposure into something positive." Raphael looked at her curiously. "What?" "Be authentic," she said simply. "Tell your story in your own words before Paul distorts it. Show how your personal experience shaped your vision for Project Babel. Truth, when embraced willingly, loses its power to hurt us when used as a weapon." Raphael stopped in the middle of the hallway, watching her with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. "Are you suggesting that I publicly reveal my identity as Rashid Murad after decades of building the persona of Raphael Muller?" "I mean, suggesting that you integrate both parts of who you are," Fiona replied softly. "Rashid and Raphael, they're both real, they've both contributed to the man you've become. And that story, told honestly, can be far more powerful than any technology we can demonstrate today." For a long moment, Raphael remained silent, his gaze lost somewhere in the distance beyond her. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different quality, softer and yet more determined. "You're right. It's time to leave the shadows behind." He took her hand, squeezing it briefly. "Thank you, Fiona, for seeing me as I am, as I really am, and still believing in me." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Danilo, running down the hallway with a tablet in his hand. "I did it!" the young programmer exclaimed breathlessly. "I detected and blocked all the accesses that Daniel could have left on the systems. And better yet, I discovered something about Moretti Tech's educational platform." Danilo quickly showed his discovery. Technical evidence that the educational software that Paolo Moretti planned to present at the forum contained significant portions of code copied from open-source projects, violating licensing terms. "He's presenting as his own innovation, something that he essentially cobbled together from other people's work," Danilo explained. "And he's doing it without giving due credit or respecting the licenses of the original developers." "That might be useful," Raphael murmured, his mind clearly processing the implications. "Not as an attack, but as a defense if necessary." At the convention center, the atmosphere was one of heightened anticipation. Rumors of a showdown between Raphael Muller and Paolo Moretti had spread, drawing a larger-than-expected crowd for the afternoon panel. Journalists milled about the lobby, eager for preliminary statements. The morning passed quickly with the Babel team welcoming visitors to their booth, demonstrating the platform and collecting user testimonials. Fiona divided her time between overseeing these activities and helping Raphael prepare for the debate, refining arguments and anticipating potential attacks. At 1:30 p.m., they began to head toward the main auditorium. On the way, they crossed paths with Paolo Moretti and his entourage. The businessman wore a confident smile, as if he was already savoring a victory in advance. "Raphael, Fiona," he greeted with false cordiality. "Looking forward to our little debate? I promise to be revealing." "We are prepared, Paolo," Raphael replied calmly. "May the truth win." Paolo laughed, the sound humorless. "The truth? Interesting choice of words for someone who has lived on appearances for so long." He cast a calculating glance at Fiona. "There is still time to reconsider my offer, Miss Grimaldi. The door remains open." "I'm exactly where I want to be," she replied firmly. "Come on, Raphael. We don't want to be late." The auditorium was packed, with over 1,000 people waiting for the panel to begin. 3 chairs were set up on the stage, 2 for the panelists and 1 for the moderator, Gregor Andreasen, who was already there, reviewing his notes. Backstage, as they waited for the announcement to enter, Raphael held Fiona's hands between his. "Whatever the outcome today," he said, his voice low and intense, "I want you to know that meeting you changed my life, Fiona. You gave me the courage to face not only Paul but my own ghosts." Before she could respond, they were called to the stage. The bright lights, the applause from the audience, the buzzing of cameras, it all created an almost surreal atmosphere as they took their places. Gregor Andreasen, impeccable in his dark suit, and with the confidence characteristic of experienced communicators, opened the panel with an introduction on the importance of educational technologies in the 21st century and the growing competition in the sector. Today we have the privilege of bringing together two of the greatest Brazilian innovators in this field, he announced. On one side, Rafael Müller, CEO of Müller Tecnologia and creator of Projeto Babel. On the other, Paolo Moretti, founder of Moretti Tech and developer of the EduConnect platform. Two visionaries, two distinct approaches to the same challenge: democratizing access to education through technology. The initial format included 10-minute presentations for each participant, followed by questions from the moderator and finally, questions from the audience. Paolo, having won the raffle, was the first to present. His presentation was technically flawless: polished slides, impressive statistics, and engaging videos of students using the EduConnect platform. His approach emphasized efficiency, measurable results, and integration with formal education systems. Education is not charity, it is investment, he concluded, looking directly at Rafael. Our platform does not just teach, it prepares students to compete in the global marketplace, with clear metrics of progress and scientifically proven results. When it was Rafael's turn, Fiona watched him stand up with a serenity he hadn't displayed in the previous few hours. Instead of going straight to the podium and beginning his technical presentation as originally planned, he walked to the front of the stage and addressed the audience directly. "I had prepared a detailed presentation about Project Babel, with graphs, numbers, and testimonials," he began, "but today I feel I need to share something more fundamental, the why behind the project, and to do that I need to tell a story that I have kept private for many years." A murmur of curiosity ran through the auditorium. Backstage, Fiona held her breath, recognizing that Rafael had decided to follow her advice. "My Novas name is Rashid Murad," he announced, his voice clear and firm. "I was born in Aleppo, Syria, and arrived in Brazil at the age of 12. As a refugee, fleeing a conflict that cost my parents their lives and destroyed everything I knew as home." The auditorium fell silent. From her seat, Fiona could see Paolo Moretti's face, which had completely lost its confident smile, replaced by an expression of disbelief. Rafael continued, recounting his arrival in Brazil without speaking a word. Of Portuguese, the isolation caused by the language barrier, his adoption by the Müller family, his struggle to rebuild his identity, and finally, how this experience shaped his vision for Project Babel. "When you can't communicate, it's like you're invisible," he explained with genuine emotion in his voice. "You exist physically, but your mind, your heart, your story, everything remains inaccessible to others." The Babel project was born from this experience. It's not just about teaching languages, it's about building bridges between worlds, enabling people to be seen and heard in their fullness. He then briefly presented the platform, but now contextualized by his personal story, each feature related to a real need that he himself had experienced. He concluded by showing videos of indigenous and peripheral communities using Babel, not only to learn new languages, but to document and preserve their own languages and cultures. "Education is not just about preparing for the market," he concluded, in direct contrast to Paolo. "It is about honoring who we are while expanding who we can be. It is about preserving roots while building wings." The applause that followed was thunderous, much warmer than that received by Paolo. When Rafael returned to his seat, Gregor Andreasen seemed genuinely moved, something rare for the journalist known for his skeptical stance. "Thank you for the extraordinary revelation, Mr. Müller, or should I say Mr. Murad," the moderator commented. "Rafael Müller is who I have become, Rashid Murad is who I will always be," he replied simply. "Both are true." The moderator nodded, clearly impressed, before turning to Paolo. "Moretti, would you like to comment on your colleague's presentation?" Paolo, quickly regaining his composure, smiled for the cameras. A moving story, no doubt. Raphael has always had a talent for emotional narratives. But we are here to discuss educational technology, not personal stories. I prefer to focus on concrete results, not sentimental appeals. Interesting you should mention results, Gregor said, consulting his notes. I have comparative data for the two platforms here. Project Babel shows significantly higher retention and continued use rates than EduConnect, especially in vulnerable communities. How do you explain this discrepancy? The question took Paolo by surprise. It was clear that he expected a moderator more aligned with his interests. His response was technical and defensive, trying to minimize the importance of these specific indicators. The debate continued, with Gregor alternately asking challenging questions to both participants. Raphael, freed from the burden of secrecy, responded with an authenticity and passion that clearly resonated with the audience. Paolo, on the other hand, became increasingly aggressive in his statements, especially when he realized he was losing ground. It was during the audience question session that the decisive moment occurred. A middle-aged woman who identified herself as a teacher at a public school on the outskirts of Salvador asked Paolo a question. Mr. Moretti, your company recently offered our school-free equipment on the condition that we abandon Project Babel, which we had been using for a year with excellent results. When we refused, we were informed that we would lose access to other educational resources provided by Moretti Tech Partners. How do you justify these coercive tactics? A murmur of disapproval ran through the auditorium. Paolo, visibly uncomfortable, tried to deny the accusations, claiming that there must have been some misunderstanding on the part of local representatives. It was at this moment that Fiona, who had been watching from backstage until then, made an impulsive decision. Taking a microphone from one of the technicians, she walked up to the stage. "Excuse me," she said, her clear voice amplified by the speakers. "I'm Fiona Grimaldi, Executive Director of the Babel Project, and I'd like to contribute to this discussion, if the moderator allows." Gregor, sensing the potential for a shocking television moment, readily agreed. "Please, Miss Grimaldi, the stage is yours." Fiona walked onto the stage with firm steps, aware of everyone's eyes on her. Her heart was beating fast in her chest, but her mind was clear, focused. In the last few days, we have received reports from at least a dozen different communities, indigenous, quilombolas, peripheral public schools, about coercive tactics similar to those described by the teacher, she began. "But I am not here to accuse Mr. Moretti." Paolo relaxed slightly, thinking he had found an unexpected ally. His mistake. "I'm here to talk about language," Fiona continued. "About how words can build or destroy. About how true communication transcends languages and reaches people's hearts." Then she did something unexpected. She began to alternate between Portuguese, English, Spanish, French, and to everyone's surprise, including Raphael, a few phrases in Arabic. In each language, she spoke about the importance of education as a tool for liberation, about the power to understand and be understood, about the dignity that comes with the ability to express oneself fully. The audience was mesmerized. Even those who did not understand all languages seemed to grasp the essence of his message through the passion and clarity of his delivery. Returning to Portuguese, Fiona addressed Paolo directly. "You mentioned yesterday, in a call to my personal phone, that you were prepared to reveal information about Raphael Muller's past unless I accepted your job offer. That is not healthy competition, Mr. Moretti. It is blackmail." An audible collective gasp ran through the auditorium. Paolo stood up abruptly, his face contorted in barely contained fury. "This is defamation. You have no proof." "Actually, I do," Fiona replied calmly, pulling her cell phone out of her pocket. "I recorded our conversation. It's legal in Brazil to record a call you're part of, especially when it involves attempted coercion." Paolo's face paled visibly. Fiona didn't press play. The threat of the recording was enough. "In addition," she continued, "our technical department has identified that the EduConnect platform contains significant portions of code copied from open-source projects, violating their licenses by not attributing proper credit." We have complete documentation, which we will make available to interested parties after this panel. The audience was now in an uproar. Gregor Andreasen, sensing the historic moment, made no attempt to interrupt Fiona. Project Babel is not perfect, she concluded, her voice softer now. We are constantly learning, adapting, growing. But our mission is genuine, to use technology to break down language and cultural barriers, to create a world where no one feels invisible because they cannot communicate, where stories like Rashid Murad's can be told and celebrated, not weaponized, where education serves not just the marketplace, but the human soul in all its diversity and potential. When he finished, the momentary silence was followed by the most thunderous ovation of the afternoon. Paolo Moretti, realizing his imminent defeat, hurriedly gathered his belongings and left the stage without saying goodbye, followed by his team in a disorganized retreat. Raphael stood up, approaching Fiona at the center of the stage. His eyes shone with a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and something deeper than words in any language could adequately express. "Thank you," he said, simply, his voice audible only to her amid the continued applause. Fiona smiled, feeling a wave of relief and accomplishment. "I just translated the truth," she replied softly. At that moment, under the spotlights and in front of hundreds of witnesses, the final barrier between them, their professional hesitation, their fear of an uncertain future, seemed to finally dissolve. The world around them disappeared for an instant when Raphael, in a gesture that surprised them both, leaned over and kissed her softly on the lips. The applause, which had already died down, erupted again with renewed enthusiasm. Gregor Andreasen, with a born communicator's unerring sense of a great ending, closed the panel with the words, "I think we have just witnessed much more than a debate about educational technology. We have seen the transformative power of authentic communication in action." As they walked off the stage hand in hand, Fiona and Raphael knew that one phase of their lives had ended, and another, much more promising one, was just beginning. 6 months have passed since the memorable confrontation at the International Education Forum in Salvador. What had begun as a potentially destructive clash had become a turning point not only for Project Babel, but for Fiona and Raphael's personal and professional lives. The sky over São Paulo was a rare, intense blue. On that spring morning, Fiona gazed out at the city from the window of her new office on the 25th floor of the Ponte building, the newly opened headquarters of the Babel Institute. The building's name was no coincidence. It had been chosen to reflect the mission of the organization that now occupied its upper floors. The repercussions after the forum were immediate and transformative. Raphael's public revelation about his past as a Syrian refugee, instead of damaging his image as Paolo Moretti had hoped, generated a wave of admiration and support. His story became a symbol of resilience and successful integration, inspiring national debates about refugee reception policies and the importance of language education as a tool for inclusion. Moretti Tech, on the other hand, faced serious consequences after Fiona's revelations. Investigations confirmed licensing violations in the code of its educational platform, resulting in lawsuits filed by the original developers. More damaging, however, were the investigative reports that followed, exposing other unethical practices at the company. Paolo Moretti was forced to resign as CEO under pressure from the board of directors, and the company underwent a complete restructuring. For Project Babel, the impact was extraordinary. Investors and government partners, impressed by the authenticity and purpose of the initiative, offered substantial funding for its expansion. In response to this exponential growth, Raphael made a transformative decision to separate Project Babel from the corporate structure of Muller Technologia, transforming it into an independent non-profit organization, Instituto Babel. Thoughtful this morning? Raphael's familiar voice interrupted Fiona's musings. He walked into her room carrying 2 cups of coffee, placing one on her desk before leaning in for a soft kiss. "Just admiring our view," she smiled, accepting both the coffee and the kiss. "I still haven't gotten used to this place." "Neither do I," Raphael admitted. surveying the large, bright space that housed not only the Institute's board of directors, but also language labs, collaborative spaces, and a multi-ethnic cultural center. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe that we actually did it. The past few months had been intense, but deeply rewarding. The Babel Institute had expanded its operations to every Brazilian state and had begun pilot projects in neighboring countries. The platform now included modules for more than 20 indigenous Brazilian languages and several languages spoken by immigrant communities, many of which were at risk of disappearing. More significant, however, was the transformation in the relationship between Fiona and Raphael. The impulsive kiss on stage in Salvador had been just the beginning. In the months that followed, as they worked side by side to restructure the project, their connection deepened, evolving naturally into a relationship that intertwined the professional and the personal in a harmonious and complementary way. "Ready?" "For the big meeting?" Raphael asked, checking his watch. "The UNESCO representatives are arriving in an hour." "Almost ready," Fiona replied, opening a folder on her laptop. "Just reviewing the details of the partnership proposal." The meeting that day represented a new milestone for the Institute, a possible global partnership with UNESCO to implement the Babel methodology in educational programs for refugees and linguistically vulnerable communities around the world. "Are you nervous?" she asked, noticing a slight tremor in Raphael's hand as he sipped his coffee. He smiled, that smile that still made her heart race. "A little, but it's a good kind of nervousness. I think about how many children like me, lost, scared, unable to communicate in a strange country, could be helped if we could get this partnership." Fiona stood, coming around the table to stand beside him. "We can do it," she said with conviction, lacing her fingers through his. "Our proposal is solid, and the methodology has proven its worth. Besides," she smiled, "we have a secret weapon." "Which one?" he asked, arching an eyebrow. "You," he replied simply. "Your story, your passion, your authenticity. That resonates with people far more than any spreadsheet or technical presentation." Raphael gently pulled her closer, hugging her. "Our secret weapon is you, Fiona. Your ability to translate not just words, but emotions, intentions, visions. Without you, Babel would be just another technological project. You gave it a soul." The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Gina, accompanied by an unexpected visitor. "Sorry to interrupt," the anthropologist said, "but we have a special guest who insisted on seeing you before the meeting with UNESCO." Beside her was Dona Iracema, the elder of the Pataxo village, who had been one of the first to adopt the Babel project. The 70-year-old woman, with features marked by time and wisdom, smiled with pride. "I came to bring you a gift," she announced in clear Portuguese, before switching to her native tongue. In her hands was an object that Fiona recognized immediately, a leather-bound journal similar to the one she had inherited from her family. "This is our village diary," Dona Iracema explained, reverting to Portuguese. "For generations, our people's knowledge has been passed down orally. Now, thanks to Project Babel, our children are recording our stories, our songs, our traditions, in our own language and in Portuguese, so that they will never be lost." She handed the journal to Fiona. "We want you to have the first copy, to remind you that words are seeds we plant for the future." Fiona accepted the gift with tears in her eyes, deeply touched by the meaning of the gesture. "It is an immense honor, Dona Iracema. I will keep it with the same care that I keep my own family's diary." "We are all one family now," the elder replied with a serene smile, "united by the same purpose, to preserve the voices of our ancestors while creating new stories together." After Dona Iracema left, Raphael looked at his watch again. "We still have 40 minutes before the meeting. I think it's the perfect time for something I've been putting off." "What?" Fiona asked, puzzled by the sudden change in his tone. "Follow me," he said, extending his hand. Raphael led her down the hallway to the elevator, but instead of going down to the lobby as she had expected, he pressed the button for the penthouse. When the doors opened, Fiona was greeted by the hanging garden that had been built on top of the building, a green oasis with panoramic views of São Paulo. To her surprise, the space was decorated with tropical flowers and small lights, as if prepared for a special occasion. In the center, a small table was set for two with a bottle of champagne in an ice bucket. "Raphael, what is this? We have an important meeting in less than an hour," she protested, although she couldn't help but smile. "That's exactly why," he replied, guiding her to the table. "Some things can't wait any longer." When they reached the center of the garden, Raphael turned to face her, holding both her hands in his. His green eyes, which she now knew were the result of surgery to hide his origins, shone with genuine emotion. "Fiona, in the past few months, you have transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. Not just the Babel project, but myself. I have become more whole, more authentic, happier with you." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "For years I lived torn between Rashid and Raphael, between past and present, between who I was and who I needed to be. You taught me that I don't have to choose, that I can honor all the parts of my story, integrate them into something new and true." To Fiona's surprise, Raphael released her hands and slowly knelt before her. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he removed a small velvet box. "We are about to embark on a global expansion of Babel, taking our vision to the world. Before this new chapter begins, I want to make sure we write it together, not just as professional partners, but as life companions." Opening the box, he revealed a delicate ring with an emerald green stone surrounded by small diamonds. "Fiona Grimaldi, will you do me the honor of marrying me?" The world seemed to pause for a moment. Although their relationship had evolved rapidly over the past few months, the proposal was unexpected, especially considering the timing, just minutes before a crucial meeting. But to Fiona, the answer was as clear as the blue sky above them. "Yes," she replied simply, before breaking into a radiant smile. "Yes, Raphael. Or should I say, yes, Rashid?" He chuckled, standing up to place the ring on her finger. "They're both equally in love with you." The kiss that followed was interrupted by the sound of champagne being opened. Turning around in surprise, they found Jana, Danilo, and the rest of the executive team emerging from their hiding place behind some larger plants. "Sorry to intrude," Jana smiled, "but Raphael insisted that we wanted to witness this moment. And record it for posterity," Danilo added, lowering the camera with which he had discreetly filmed the request. Amid hugs, congratulations, and quickly poured glasses of champagne, the team celebrated briefly before reminding everyone about the upcoming meeting with UNESCO. 20 minutes, warned Danilo, checking his watch. In the elevator on the way down to the conference room, Fiona looked at the ring on her finger, still processing the change in her life. Beside her, Raphael looked simultaneously nervous and elated. "Are you sure this was the right time?" she asked, laughing softly. "Before one of the most important meetings of our careers." "It couldn't be more perfect," he replied, with conviction. "This meeting is not just about a contract or a partnership. It's about the future we want to build together, for the Institute and for ourselves. I wanted to walk into that room with you, not just as my CEO or my girlfriend, but as my future wife, as my chosen family." The elevator doors opened on the conference room floor where Fiona's assistant, Marcia, was waiting anxiously. "Everyone's here," she informed, before noticing the ring on Fiona's finger. Her eyes widened, but professional as ever, she simply smiled and whispered, "Congratulations. Details later, please." The UNESCO delegation, made up of representatives from several countries, was already seated in the large meeting room. World maps and large screens displayed data on linguistically vulnerable populations and refugee communities around the globe. "Ladies and gentlemen," Raphael began after the formal introductions, "today we are not just proposing an institutional partnership. We are inviting you to join a mission to ensure that no person in the world feels invisible or silenced because they cannot communicate in their own language or the language of their new home." As he spoke, Fiona watched the man who had agreed to become her husband. Confident, passionate, fully integrated into his plural identity. No longer hiding his origins, but using them as a source of strength and purpose. When it was her turn to present the methodological aspects of the program, Fiona felt a deep connection, not only with Raphael and the team around him, but with all the women in her family line who had used the gift of languages to build bridges between different worlds. Somehow she knew that her great-grandmother Clara, her grandmother Teresa, and all the others would be proud to see her there, continuing the family legacy in ways they could never have imagined. The presentation was a resounding success. The AIMA visibly impressed UNESCO representatives not only agreed to the proposed partnership, but suggested further expanding the initial scope, including refugee camps in Africa and the Middle East as priority locations for implementation. "This is where it all started for me," Raphael commented in a particularly emotional moment. "To be able to bring this tool to children living in similar situations to what I experienced. There are no words in any language that can express what this means." At the end of the meeting, as the preliminary documents were signed and official, photos recorded the historic moment. Fiona and Raphael exchanged a knowing look that said more than any words could express. They had made it. The dream that had begun with an unexpected phone call less than a year earlier was now becoming a global reality. That night, after all the celebrations and additional gatherings, the couple finally found a moment of tranquility on the rooftop of the building. The city of São Paulo glowed below them, an ocean of light stretching to the horizon. "So, future Mrs. Müller-Grimaldi," Raphael joked, hugging Fiona from behind as they took in the view. "Or was it Murad Grimaldi?" She laughed, turning to face him. "How about just Fiona and Raphael, or Fiona and Rashid? Names are just symbols, after all. What matters is who we are to each other." "And who are we?" he asked softly, stroking her face. "Translators," she replied after a moment of thought. "Not just of languages, but of dreams into reality, of past into future, of pain into purpose." Raphael nodded, his eyes shining with excitement. "I like that definition, and now we have the whole world to translate together." Under the starry sky of São Paulo, they sealed that promise with a kiss that transcended words in any language. The future that opened up before them was wide and full of possibilities, like a blank page waiting to be filled with stories yet untold. As they walked away to gaze once more at the city lights, Fiona thought of all the lives that would be touched by their work, of all the bridges that would be built between different cultures. Her family's journal would continue, now intertwined with Raphael Rashid's legacy and the stories of communities around the world. On her finger, the ring with the green stone glinted in the city lights, not just a symbol of personal commitment, but of a shared mission that transcended linguistic and cultural boundaries. Together they were rewriting the history that Paolo Moretti had tried to weaponize, transforming it into a beacon of hope and inspiration. "Ready to translate the future?" Raphael whispered in her ear. "Word by word, day by day," she replied, lacing her fingers through his and feeling with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, building bridges where before there had been only chasms.